there is a deep sense of unease in our rapidly changing world. We all know something has been lost, but we don't know why or where it all leads. Popular culture tells us it is all about me, and that we should worship our creations rather than the Creator. In politics, the end justifies the means. In relationships, love means self-satisfaction. In life, status and appearance are what count. In the church, confusion replaces clarity and conviction. Our faulty and distorted view of God is at the root of all our problems within and without. But what if we viewed God differently? What if we saw him the way he longed for us to see him? Instead of worshiping a comfortable golden calf of our own creation, we can worship a God that is holy, wise, and just, one whose faithfulness and goodness are matched by his power and sovereignty over all things. This is a God that can deliver us from evil and transform lives. This is a God worth worshiping. The way back, the path of hope, starts with knowing God for who he really is. We need to know the real God.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Encore. You made it, yeah. With like mild rain and Super Bowl, you are still here. This is awesome. So excited that all of you are here tonight. And thank you for being a part of our 8-week series called Real God. Like this is powerful. And what we've been noticing is that as people begin to engage with this series and be a part of all of our services and all of our different experiences, and as people open up their Bible, as people are part of small groups, something unique is happening to them. And that uniqueness is that they're experiencing the power of God differently, and they're leaving these moments more encouraged, more energized by their relationship with Jesus. And so today, we're going to be talking about the holiness of God. This is a massive topic. Like, I don't believe that there's anything that I'm going to say or any clever words that could even get close to trying to comprehend the holiness of God. Because that word holy is really just set up. It means set apart. But his set apart is so different, so out there, so beyond. We can't fathom it. We can't begin to wrap our minds around it. He's so different. God is unique like no other. And so our core idea for this morning, for this evening, it's not going to be on the screen, so just jot it down. It's this, is uniquely wow. Uniquely wow. And you could caps, you put it all caps, the W-O-W, just make it all in caps. Wow. And then exclamation point at the end to emphasize it. Because when something is uniquely wow, you almost feel less than. You have these different emotions that come out of you. You can't begin to understand. You just feel like I'm in the presence of something very different right now. For instance, back in the 60s, there was something called Beatlemania. Here's the first picture up here. Beatlemania. Could you imagine being the grandmother, right? Like this lady is a grandmother, being the granddaughter of this lady, like, that's you? Like, what happened? I mean, look at these faces. This is what you call emotional overload. These people, when they saw John, Paul, Ringo, and George, it radically changed them. They're like, and completely lost it. Something happens when we see these kind of people. Like, we just don't become the same. We're just like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. We have a lady at our church that before her and her husband had kids, they lived in Portland. And she, for some reason, just loves the Carolina Panthers. So she flew cross country just to watch the Carolina Panthers during training camp. Just practice, y'all. Flew cross country for that. And she sent us a picture one time of her with the Carolina Panthers, some of the players. The funny thing is it's on this shelf. On the top shelf, a picture of a wedding day. Right underneath that, a picture with her and the Carolina Panthers. Like, that's just crazy. But isn't that interesting that when we get around certain people that are just so uniquely different and wow, it does something. Here's another picture of just a beautiful mountain landscape. I mean, this is just wow. You look at that, you really do feel insignificant, but you feel inspired. You look at that, you're like, okay, there is a God. God is real. God is powerful. And he made this. This is just one of those moments that you just stand in awe. What I'm about to talk about next is going to come up in the video in a minute, okay? But before I talk about this video, before we show it, I got to talk a little bit about it. Because we have a guy on staff who's been to over 20 and filmed over 20 shuttle launches, okay? Filmed over 20 shuttle launches. So he was there. He got like special access. And he says, Marcio, the video you're about to show doesn't do it justice. Like nothing you could do or say could comprehend being that close, feeling the power of that engine. It's mind-blowing. It's wow. So I want us all to watch this video.
15 seconds and the sound suppression water system has been activated. We have a go from main start. 3 engines up and ready. 3, 2, 1, 0. Boosters open.
Didn't it look like there was a sunrise? I mean, the power of that engine, it was like it was emulating the sun. This was in the middle of the night. Like, it was mind-blowing. And the closer you get to that, the more dangerous that magnificent vision, that magnificent experience, the closer you get, the more dangerous it is to you. And all these 3 things I talked about doesn't even come close to God. They don't deserve the word holy. Only God deserves that word. It's reserved only for him. And the closer we get to him, we don't know what to do. We're like, oh my gosh. Like there's fear, and then there's excitement. There's joy, and then there's just absolute terror. Because in his holiness, he's so perfect and yet so dangerous. And in all of that, God is extremely personal. So we're going to dive into learning a little bit more about God's holiness. There was a psalmist, a guy who wrote a chapter in the book of Psalms. Now, the book of Psalms is right in the middle of your Bible. And in Psalms 99, we're going to break down some things about God's holiness. And the first thing we see in the first section of Psalm 99 is this, is that God is above it all. God is above it all. What does that mean? That there's no one like him. He's so out there, so different. Nothing compares to who God is. Look what the psalmist says in Psalm 99, verse 2. The Lord is great in Zion. That's their particular region. He is exalted above all the people. So he's like, hey, God is really above all in our area. No, hold on. God is above all everywhere. No one comes close. Nothing compares. No one even can fathom who God is, what he's capable of doing. I mean, he's just supreme and most powerful being of all time. Forever. The second thing we see in this collection, in this psalm, in this journal entry of God's holiness is this, is that God is incorruptible. Now, this is not a word we use every day. Incorruptible. So it just means God is unable to be corrupted. See, you and I, as people, we could be corrupted. We are corrupted. We're flawed. We're impure. But God, he's pure. He's perfect. He cannot be bribed. He cannot be manipulated. He is incorruptible. He doesn't swerve towards any bad decision. There's no bad that comes out of him. He is perfect. And this is what the psalmist says in Psalm 99:4 about God. The mighty king loves justice. He loves to correct all wrongs. He fights for the oppressed. That's what it's saying. you have established fairness. And this word here, this is interesting, fairness. See, the way you and I think of fairness, it's along the lines of like our kids. You know, I have twin 8-year-old boys and a 4-year-old girl. And if one of them gets something, it's like, Dad, you're not fair. How come Madeline got the frozen white chocolate and we didn't get anything? Not fair. And I have to like create, I have to like manage all these emotions. And we look at kids and say, oh, that's just silly about kids. But let me tell you what, every single one of us in this room, no matter how old you are, you want God to be fair to you like I want God to be fair to me at times, like my kids. Let's just be honest. We're corruptible. So when something's happened, someone else gets the promotion or somebody else gets the date or somebody else gets something, you're like, what about me, God? I deserve it. And it's good if we understand that God's holiness, when it comes to him being fair, it's all about the end result of restoring this world back to its original form in its glory. And it's all about bringing glory to God. And it says here that you have administered justice and righteousness in Jacob. Jacob is the land of Israel. So it's just a different name, like we would say America or the United States. The third thing we learn in Psalm 99 about God's holiness is that God is consistent. God is consistent. He's consistent in everything that's in his holiness and his perfection. He is consistent. It's very important that we know that. Look what the psalmist says in Psalm 99, verse 8. Lord our God, you answered them. Who's the them? The them is the nation of Israel. So the psalmist is writing about how you've answered the nation of Israel's prayers. You were a forgiving God to them, but an avenger of their sinful actions. So what the psalmist is saying here is like, look, the nation of Israel messed up a ton, and you constantly kept forgiving them when they asked for your forgiveness. And then you disciplined and corrected them and punished them when they were off. Now here's the thing. When we read the Bible, sometimes we have the audacity to think, oh, look at these Israelites. They're dumb. Like, how did they not get it? Time and time again, centuries and centuries again. They just didn't get it, did they? They didn't understand. Hey, you messed up. God is showing you things. Why aren't you listening? When we read the Bible, let's have a more of a humble posture, because in that narrative, we're Israel. I'm Israel. You're Israel. We mess up all the time. And aren't we glad that in God's holiness, he not just forgives us, but he corrects us. He's like, hey, I'm gonna guide you towards becoming the person I meant for you to be, and have established certain things along the way so that when you step in line with my calling and my correction and my discipline, you're gonna be the person and live in the purpose that I've called you to be and live in. See, in all of this, in these three sections, the psalmist ends up concluding God's holiness by doing this. Look at this in Psalm 99, verse 3, 5, and 9. The first section, he ends with God is holy. Because what? What did he say? Right? God is above all. God is holy. God is incorruptible. God is holy. The Lord our God is holy. Right after he talked about God being consistent. Here's the thing we have to understand. God is holy. He's perfect. He's so set apart. But the tension that we have as people is that we think in God's holiness and we fear it, that he is so out there, so far removed from us, and in his purity and holiness, he wants nothing to do with us. I have a friend who, when I used to go to his house in middle school, I would come into the garage, go into the kitchen, and I'd be a part of, I would go into the room that we could hang out with. But to my right, there was this room that nobody could go into. How many of you have had parents or friends of parents that they either A, have a room that you're not allowed to go in, or they have things that you're not allowed to touch, like fine china, right? These plates that you only take out once every, century maybe, or a decade. Like, this is a special event, we'll take it out. You know what I'm saying? That these things are so different. And if you get close, and if you touch these things, if you get near them, what happens? Boom, you're zapped, you're dead, you're in trouble. That's what we think of God. Here's the crazy thing. In all of his holiness, guess what? If we approach with our impurity, with our negligence, to think that I could just approach God in his holiness and in his perfect purity. Man, yeah, he would wipe us out, and he could wipe us out. But here's the thing we need to understand. That even in God's holiness and his perfection and his purity, the difference between God and what we think about him is this, is that even in his holiness, he looks at our impurity, he looks at our brokenness, he looks at our corruptibility. And he says, hey, I see the situation you're in, and I want to bring my holiness close to you. That is the difference maker with our God, that he wants to bring his holiness and embrace us with it. And when he does, things begin to happen like this. In his holiness, God corrects us. In his holiness, he corrects us. It's like in his holiness, we're able to see, listen, we're able to acknowledge and see our wrong ways. And he's going to correct us in the way he chooses. Now, there's a small book in the Old Testament written by a guy named Habakkuk, okay? Long name. Would be awful to put on a Scantron, right? So, long name. And in these 3 little chapters, he's complaining about how God is choosing to discipline the nation of Israel. Watch this, look at this. In Habakkuk 1, verse 12, says this. So this is Habakkuk's journal. He's writing to God saying, are you not from eternity, Lord my God, my Holy One? You will not die. So he's saying, God, the way you're establishing your punishment and your judgments on me, is it going to affect you? Guess what? Because you're God. It isn't going to mess with you. But sure enough, messing with me. And he says, Lord, you appointed them. Who's them? It's this nation called Babylon. So these people who are absolutely against God in every way, shape, or form. And God is using them to correct the nation of Israel. So he's saying, you use these guys to execute judgment, my rock. You destined them to punish, correct us. The reality is when we're faced with God's holiness, we see our error. And here's the thing, he wants to change us. His holiness is supposed to alter us, transform us. And when we look at it, we're going to see our error, our corruptibility, our wrong ways. It would be like you wanting to get healthy or me wanting to get healthy. And I think I have this great way of getting healthy until I stand by LeBron James or Tom Brady. And I say, you know what? I want to be y'all's age. I want to have the longevity you have. I want to have the physique. I want to have this ability to be healthy like you are. So they're going to say, great. Well, here's what we do. See, they're so different and set apart. And in that moment, I would have to be humble and say, well, I see all the stuff that I'm doing wrong. And in order for me to get to this and obtain this goal, I need to start going through your regimen. I need to start going through your training method. I need to start disciplining myself the way you discipline yourself. See, and what happens with God is that in his holiness, he's looking at you and saying, do you see how wrong you are? And then you're like, well, I don't know. I kind of like it this way. But when you really look at God's holiness, it not just reveals to you, you are wrong about how you're acting, about how you're dating, about how you're spending your money, about your entire direction of life. You are wrong in how you're dealing with that person. But then when we look at the holiness of God, he doesn't just evaporate us and smack us down and punish us and leave us to die. No, in his holiness, he's like, hey, this is the way to go. It's going to sting, but it's going to be good for you because it's going to produce a harvest of right living, of peace, of goodness. And isn't it interesting, in order to correct somebody, that you need to be close to somebody? The best form of correction is proximity, is intimacy. It's close to that person. See, the next thing about God's holiness is that in his holiness, God forgives us. This is crazy. I mean, forgiveness requires even more intimacy, because there is offense that has happened, and the person offended, man, that makes it intimate. Anytime we've been offended by somebody else, it becomes intimate. It becomes personal. It hurts. And in order to remedy that, you got to get close. There has to be some kind of connection that happens. And we're going to look into an Old Testament story of a guy named Isaiah. Actually, you could find his whole journal entry, his whole mission in life, the messages he gave to the nation of Israel to help them, you know what, get back to following God. It's right in the middle of the Bible, right after Psalms. And one day he has this encounter with God where he's brought to like right where God is. And he's like, oh my goodness, I don't think I'm supposed to be here. Like, this is God. And God is just, his presence is making him so scared, but he's so at peace. He's so nervous, yet he's so calm. It's like everything is going all over the place, emotional overload. Then he writes about this. Look what he writes in Isaiah 6, verse 6 and 7. This is so neat. He says, then one of the seraphim, what's a seraphim, you're asking? It's a really out there creature with multiple wings that all he does is worship God. That'd be scary to see. Like if one of them popped in right now, we'd all freak out. That's what I'm saying. We'd lose it. He flew to me, and in his hand was a glowing coal that he had taken from the altar with tongs. So there was an altar there burning, giving praise to God. And what we see here theologically with the coal and the tongs is that there will be barbecue in heaven. Guaranteed. Guaranteed barbecue in heaven because of the coal and the tongs. But here's the thing. What happens next is mind-blowing. So here's what you guys want to do. You want to highlight in your Bible this whole area. So the seraphim, this really gnarly creature, touched my mouth with the coal and said, now that this has touched your lips, your iniquity, your guilt because you've offended God, Isaiah. You violated God's standard and principles. You are corruptible, and you're in the presence of incorruptibility. You're in the presence of purity, of holiness, of power. Hey, your guilt is removed. Oh, and by the way, your sin, your error, your deadness in your soul is taken care of. This is monumental. This is mind-blowing that God would be that personal, that someone so holy would want to get so close, that someone so holy would want to change you, would want to transform you, would want to mold you, and it could only happen as he's transferring his holiness to us. And where do we see that in? Wait a minute. Where do we see it? Oh, Jesus, perfect, God, holy, comes to earth and gets within 3 feet or less of people because change only happens within 3 feet or less. It means it has to be personal. This transformation that Jesus, through the transformation that he wants to give us, the holiness he wants to transfer us happens in forgiveness when we just give our lives to him and say, Jesus, I want your holiness. Jesus, forgive me because I've messed up, because in his holiness you see how bad you've been. In his holiness you see that you don't deserve his goodness. And at the same time, in his holiness you see you love me. In Mark chapter 5, there's a story of a lady who is bleeding and having all these medical issues. And because of where blood was coming out of her body, man, she was ostracized. She was an outcast. And then she touched Jesus, and Jesus grabbed her by the hand and said, daughter, hey, you're my daughter. You're healed. His holiness transferred to her. She lived differently after that moment. Another moment, it's actually mind-blowing. It's in John chapter 8, where this woman is caught in the act of adultery because these guys, these religious leaders, set her up to kill her, really. But this woman has had kind of a past to get to this kind of situation, wouldn't you agree? And now she's in front of Jesus, waiting to die, and Jesus pulls a judo move on all these other guys, and they all leave. Now it's just Jesus and this woman, and Jesus says, I don't condemn you. I don't condemn you. Look, you're not guilty in my eyes. You're not, listen, you're forgiven in my eyes. Then he says the most powerful thing. He says, now go and sin no more. Now he says, hey, go and live differently. Go and be someone with my holiness. Here, I'm transferring my holiness to you. Now go and display my holiness to the world. This is mind-blowing. And what we need to understand about the holiness of God is this, is that in his holiness, God changes us. In his holiness, God changes us. That his holiness is transferred to you and I the moment we say yes to Jesus, and we don't deserve it. Now, here's the thing about this transfer. See, right after in Isaiah, the very next verse, Isaiah is now given a mission because he's been made holy. He has a new purpose in life. See, when God transfers his holiness to you, he's transferring it so that you could have a new purpose, a new meaning, a new significance, a new way of living. I love what Jesus' best friend on earth, Peter, says here in 1 Peter 1, 15 and 16. But as the one who called you is holy. So as God, listen to this, he called you. He called you holy. See, the moment you say yes to Jesus, this is crazy that Jesus, all perfect, human, God, man, looks at you, looks at me. The moment we acknowledge we need his forgiveness, and he calls us holy, set apart, different, unique. This is crazy. And then he says, you also are to be holy in all your conduct, so we ought to live differently. Because of Jesus' transferring of his holiness onto us, we now have the power to live differently. Then he says this, for it is written, be holy because I am holy. Oh. There you go. Be holy as I am holy. And the thing about that was written in the Old Testament. See, throughout the Bible narrative, what you're going to see is that a God who's so holy, so powerful, and we ought to fear him, actually wants to get close to us and transfer his holiness to us. And when he transfers his holiness to us, we change. Because what you're supposed to see if you call yourself a follower of Jesus Christ, in your holiness now that you have from God, God now makes you holy. And he positions you in a place where you have immediate access to God, like all the time. You have access to God. And then in that holiness, he allows you to see who you were and for you not to want that anymore. See, the closer you get to God, the more holy he makes you. And so from the moment you say yes to Jesus to the day you die here on earth, that journey called life with Christ is all about making you more like him. And all about making you more like him is making you more holy. And in his holiness, as the closer you get, the more you get to him, and the more you obtain him, the more you love him, the more time you spend with him, he's making you more holy. So then when you look at the things that caused you death, oh my goodness, those things actually disgust you. You look at the very things that put our Savior on the cross, and you're like, I don't want that, because the more holiness I have, the more of Jesus I have. I don't want this. Now, here's the thing about holiness when it comes to Christianity, and I'm trying to wrap my mind around this. When we become Christians and we become holy, what ends up happening is that we say, oh, I'm holy, so let me create a little box of my holiness for just me, mine, and I. And we're gonna be nice and holy. Can't go talk to that person. I don't want my kids around those kids. No, I can't hang out with that guy at work because I'm holy. Holiness, listen, holiness is just to make you a better version of you, not for you to call out all the stuff in other people's life. Holiness is supposed to make you a better version of you. It's supposed to make you like Jesus. See, hey, I'm just gonna call everybody out here. When you have young kids, do you remember how when a friend of yours or family member's kids were sick, how we treated that family member? Be like, get away, you have the bubonic plague over there. My kids don't touch their kids, we don't talk, because what happens? I don't want that fever in my home. I don't want that junk at my house. It's like, don't even go talk to them. You might get it over the phone. The flu's going on. Now, here's the thing. Follow me here. See, as Christians, when Jesus sees us do that, he just weeps. It doesn't make sense to him because he's like, I saw you that way and I didn't run for you. I run from you. I ran towards you. I transferred my holiness onto you. So as Christians, listen to what we got to do. We take the holiness of God and we transfer it. We transfer it to our friends so they could see us. They can see how different we live. We transfer it, listen, we transfer for those at work who don't know us, but they see us work. They see us work hard. We transfer it to our neighborhoods, where our neighbors see how we love our wives, how we love our husbands, how we love our kids. We transfer God's holiness to people we love, to our friends, through our lives. And then they'll sit here, they'll sit there, and then they'll watch you worship. They'll watch you worship. They'll watch you transfer your love to God. Be like, God, I love you. I love you because you're holy. I love you because you're good. I love you because you changed me. And they're just going to watch. You're like, whoa, God is real. God is worth worshiping. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to be a church that transfers the holiness of God to people. We're going to be a church that when people see us, they're going to be in awe, not just of us, but of God. So I want us to stand, and we're going to worship the holiness of God, because we are going to be the kind of people that's going to be holy to God. We're going to show our holiness to others. We're going to show that when he transfers to us, it's so powerful, so amazing, so worth it, that everybody we know will want to be holy, want his love, want to change for his glory and for his holiness. Amen.